For over 2,000 years, humans have forced each other to be traded, bought, sold, and forcibly transported under conditions of extreme cruelty. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, Europeans captured, kidnapped, uprooted, and forced more than 12 million Africans to cross the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. It was called the Transatlantic slave trade. Before 1600, a few 100,000 African men had been forcibly transported to the Americas, but it was in the 17th century that demand for labor really grew. European plantation owners wanted labor to farm the sugarcane fields in the Caribbean and North America. The slave trade had devastating impacts on millions of people. Here's how it worked. The slave trade followed a triangular route. Traders sailed from Europe to West Africa, where they bought slaves in exchange for goods. These people were then loaded onto ships and taken across the Atlantic. This was known as the Middle Passage, a journey that took 6 to 8 weeks. Those that survived the journey were offloaded in the Americas and forced to work. The ships were then loaded with goods to be transported back to Europe, such as rice, sugar, coffee, tobacco, and cotton that were harvested by slaves. West Africa had a sophisticated economy. Art, medicine, and technology flourished, and luxury items in bronze, gold, and terracotta were traded with Europeans through North America for centuries. In the 15th century, the Portuguese, followed by the Dutch, French, and British, sailed to West Africa. European traders captured slaves in raids or bought them from local European or African dealers. The enslaved people were either kidnapped, captured in battle, or sold into slavery as punishment or to cover debts. Once captured, they were marched to the coast, often shackled to one another, and imprisoned in large forts or wooden houses until European ships arrived. The slave trade wreaked havoc on West Africa. By providing firearms to dealers, warfare and political instability increased. Millions of Africans were ripped away from their families. More than 2/3 of those enslaved were men. Slavers spent months on the African coast buying slaves. Once purchased, enslaved people were stripped naked for inspections. Men were packed below deck with leg irons. Often space was so limited they were forced to crouch or lie down. Seasickness was common, and poor sanitation along with inadequate food supplies led to frequent outbreaks of disease. Those who died during the journey were simply thrown overboard. Some historical records suggest that until 1750, 1 in 5 Africans died during the 6 to 8 week long journey through the Middle Passage. In the 1800s, British and French governments introduced laws to prevent overcrowding on ships out of concern for the crew, and fatalities decreased to 1 in 80. Many of the enslaved tried to revolt unsuccessfully and were duly punished. Some went on hunger strikes and committed suicide as acts of protest. Once the ships reached the Americas, the surviving slaves were cleaned and rubbed with palm oil to cover up the conditions they had endured on board. Captains sold slaves directly to plantations or at auctions. Families and bonds formed during the voyage were broken up. New owners entered a process of seasoning. They enforced new living and working conditions as well as new customs and language. They tried to strip the identities of the enslaved, to break their wills and sever any ties with their past. Many died during this brutal process. Others resisted and were punished. For nearly 400 years, Africans were used as slaves in the plantations, in the mines, and in the countrysides of the Caribbean and North America. They were forced to work in order to build wealth for their owners. They were often underfed, mistreated, and subject to physical and sexual violence. All activities such as celebrating a birth or mourning a death were controlled by their owners. They were severely punished for minor offenses. The lifestyle of much of the elite in Western Europe revolved around the products of slave labor for cotton, coffee, sugar, and tobacco. The merchants involved in the slave trade made fortunes from it. Many historians argue that the profits from slavery stimulated so much trade that it was foundational to the growth of modern European economies and global capitalism.